Evan Nierman is an amazing person with a lot of experience in communication, crisis, and PR. He wrote a book called Crisis Averted, and he's my guest on the podcast today. Hello, and welcome to a new episode of the Business of Meaning podcast. And today, I have an amazing guest for you, the guy who is behind the curtain to help people in any type of crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Evan Nierman, the CEO and founder of Red Banyan. Evan, thank you so much for taking the time.
I am excited to be here, and I can't wait to get into it with you.
The problem that I have is that this podcast lasts, anywhere between 30 and 45 minutes. And with you, I can speak hours. But first thing first, why don't we start? What is your story?
Oh, yeah. You want me to just talk for 45 minutes about my boring story? Well, there was a beautiful woman in Louisiana who met a man. They saw each other, and I arrived 9 months later. My story. Okay, I'm gonna give you the super condensed story of my life, and then if you want to pick apart certain aspects, we can go into it.
Awesome.
I was born and raised in Shreveport, Louisiana. I was the oldest of three boys, three male first cousins who were more like my brothers. My grandparents in Louisiana had 6 grandsons, no granddaughters. I spent the first 18 years of my life in Shreveport, Louisiana, had a great childhood, lots of interest in soccer and school and activities, social action. Went to school at George Washington University in DC, studied communication. When I left my college graduation, on the actual graduation, I left early and went to jump in a taxi, told my parents goodbye and my grandparents because I needed to get to an event that we had been planning for months and months. And we had 2,000 people coming to the Hilton in DC. So I needed to get over there to staff the event. I'm sure your listeners can relate to a story like that. Spent the next 7.5 years working in communications for an organization called APAC, which strengthens the relationship between the United States and Israel, doing all manners of communications, content creation, media strategy, event planning, speech writing, internal and external communications. Left APAC, worked at a high stakes and crisis communications firm in DC. I opened their DC office. We had some high flying CEO clients, some foreign governments as clients. I was a one-man press operation for a North African country, which was quite interesting. Did that for a year and a half, moved to South Florida to Fort Lauderdale, worked for a startup that had raised a lot of money as their spokesperson and communications director. Did that for a year and a half and decided I needed to start my own business. So I started Red Banyan. And somewhere in between all of that, I managed to get married, stay married for 19 years, and have 2 wonderful kids who are now 15 and 12. And day to day, I'm focused on the work that Red Banyan does for our clients and my passions, which include learning, speaking, reading, going to live music events, spending time with fascinating people, and appearing on podcasts directed at the event organizing space. So this is the culmination of all of my life's experience has brought me to this chair today.
That's phenomenal. And we met thanks to EO and got developed friendship there. So Louisiana, that means we can speak in French or in Cajun?
Oui, oui.
Oui, oui. Okay. Well, leave it there. Phenomenal.
Merci beaucoup.
So I've heard of people not graduating or leaving the graduation just after to jump on a plane and go on holidays. You're the first person that I hear saying, I just say thank you, goodbye to my parents and family and rush to the Hilton to organize an event. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So one of the cool things about going to school at George Washington University is that you are in the heart of Washington, D.C. So part of the reason I chose GW was I wanted to be where the action was. I wanted to be what's in sort of the proverbial center of the universe in terms of politics and policy and international affairs. So I was really interested in Washington, and I loved GW because my freshman year, I lived 2 blocks from the old executive office building. I was a 10-minute walk from the National Mall. I was enmeshed in all things Washington. And one of the cool perks at the time I think they've since changed it for security reasons, was you got to graduate every year on the ellipse of the White House. So literally my graduation was on the White House lawn, which was pretty remarkable. And as I said, some of the people who were the most important influences of my life were there. My mother, my father, my grandfather, who is really my mentor and guiding light, and my grandmother, God bless her, who just turned 98 years old 2 weeks ago.
Wow, Mazal Tov.
Thank you. So yeah, what happened was we had an interesting speaker at the time. It was Senator Bob Dole, who had just lost a run for president. So I'm dating myself. This is back in the mid 90s. And he's actually, probably most known by people later for being that old dude on the Viagra commercials. But at the time, he was actually a very important senator and the Republican nominee for president. But I do remember you never remember anything that graduation speakers say because it's all kind of the same unless it's Stanley McChrystal's remarks. Was it McChrystal? Yeah, I think it was Stanley McChrystal who spoke at the University of Austin, or Steve Jobs' speech at Stanford. Those are some memorable ones. This one was most memorable because Bob Dole, who had just lost the presidential election, said something to the effect of, I had actually foreseen this moment where I would be speaking before a large gathering, but I thought it would be a few hundred yards over there, and I would be saying, I, Bob Dole, do solemnly swear, and taking the oath of office. Instead, he was just talking to a bunch of GW graduates. But yes, finished the graduation, jumped in a taxi, went straight to the event, which we'd been planning for somewhere between 4 and 6 months. So that was my first day being out of school and being a working stiff. And I've never had a single day since then. And that was 25 years ago. I've been employed every single day since. So I don't really know what it's like to not have a job or have something that you're working on that you care about.
That's awesome. So you were planning an event. Why did you pick the date of your graduation to put that event together?
I was a peon. I was an intern before I was hired. And clearly I had absolutely no power in selecting the date. And when I discovered that the date was going to be my graduation, I was actually embarrassed. I had to go to my boss, who I'd been an intern there, and she had offered me a full-time job. And when I accepted the job, when I saw that the conference was going to be then, and it was months in advance, I said to her, "Oh my gosh, I'd like to take the job, but just so you know, I'm graduating the same day as the conference, so I might be a few hours late getting there." And she said, "Don't worry about it. It's fine."
Nice. And so you told me the largest event you planned was a conference with 20,000 people.
Yes, although it wasn't just me. I was part of a team of people, obviously. When you're talking about an event of that scale, there's never one person. And I wasn't even the person who was leading the team. I was responsible for certain pieces of the puzzle. A good friend of mine was actually responsible for organizing the whole thing from the top. And that's why his hair is a lot grayer than mine. And, he has a lot more wrinkles than I do. But I was just responsible for my part of the event. And, up until COVID happened, that same event happened 20 years in a row. And I was there for every single event. Never missed a year.
Wow. The APAC conference.
APAC Policy Conference in Washington, D.C.
That's phenomenal. And then I can proudly say that not only I love the organization, but my elder daughter was able to attend. And it's a phenomenal event. Now, when you plan such an event in Washington, I mean, it's just insane when you think about the type of people that are speaking, the security issues, the room block and everything. So it's almost like a year in advance planning for the year afterwards. Can you, if it's not confidential, tell us about some of the things that didn't occur as it was planned and that you had to jump in?
Well, that always happens. I've got a couple of stories for you that are not classified that I can tell you. A few come to mind, but I will tell you that the team that put together that event, when I started there were 2,000 people or less than 2,000 at the first conference. And over the course of my time there, it grew and grew and grew. And you talk about planning in advance. They literally were signing contracts to reserve the convention center and hotel blocks 5 years in advance. Because when you're talking about a critical mass of people, there were individuals who were responsible for coordinating with the Secret Service, with Metro PD. There needed to be police escorts to take tens of thousands of people up to Capitol Hill for appointments. It is just a mammoth undertaking. And so there were the amount of logistics. It went from, when it was fewer than 2,000 people, you had a core team of 5 or 7 people running and organizing it. And by the time it made its way to 20,000, you had dozens and dozens and dozens of people responsible for planning that event. Now, stories of things that went wrong. There are always things that go wrong. There are things for which you can plan and things that you cannot. Some of my favorite memories from the conference that I can talk about, and it's fascinating, Eric, because DC is known as Hollywood for ugly people.
Oh.
Okay, in case you didn't know that. The point is, celebrities in Hollywood and in Los Angeles, there's a different celebrity in DC, and the celebrity in DC goes by the name senator or congressman or president. What's really remarkable, and I saw this through the 20 years that I was there, is sometimes the people who you think you're going to like because they seem like such nice guys on TV are the worst ones. And the ones who seem so curmudgeonly or have the worst reputation are actually the nicest and surprise you. So I'll give you a couple of funny stories from the past of things that went wrong. One year at the Hilton, there was a member of Congress who was in a wheelchair. And, we're running around the conference with earpieces and radios, pretending, looking like we're Secret Service. And so all around us, people are milling about. They're doing their thing. They're experiencing the conference. And meanwhile, in your ear, there's an entirely different thing going on that no one around you sees. And so there was a moment where we're getting ready to start the session, and there's a frantic call over the radio telling us that the member of Congress is stuck in the elevator and the power is out. Can someone please get him out? He needs to be freed from the elevator. I remember one year, the Democratic leader in the House and the Republican leader in the House didn't want to physically be in the same space with each other.
Wow.
And so they needed to be kept in separate areas. And I was responsible for managing an event where we had people, several thousand people in one room, several people thousand in another room. And we had this whole choreographed dance where one was going to speak to one group, one was going to speak to the other, and then we were going to move them without a break in the programming in either. And they were going to cross, they were going to go around different ways so they didn't interact with each other. And we got woefully behind schedule. And the House Speaker at the time, I was given the assignment of going to him to explain that even though he'd been cooling his heels for well over an hour, was going to have to wait another hour before he went out on the stage. And I had to convince him not to leave because he was very upset. But that was kind of challenging. There was the year when the Vice President of the United States, I was responsible as the stage manager, and Vice President Cheney was going out onto the stage. And I was responsible for briefing the Vice President and making sure that he went to the appropriate, there were multiple podiums. He had to go to the right podium at the right time. And at the moment when he was not supposed to start walking out, he started walking out from behind the curtain and onto the stage. So I reached out and I grabbed his shoulder.
And the Secret Service jumped on you?
And the Secret Service was right there. And he kind of spun around. I was like, Mr. Vice President, not yet. He's like, oh, thank you. That would have been embarrassing. Thanks so much. And meanwhile, I was afraid I was about to get beat up by some burly Secret Service guys, but the Vice President was actually very nice. So those are a few funny ones.
That's awesome. Oh, my goodness. And when you're talking about, police escort and everything, remind me of an event I was planning for Café de Colombia in 1998, the World Cup, the final of the World Cup. And 2 days before, it was Sunday, the 12th of July, 1998. The president in Europe, the president of Café de Colombia in Europe told me that they had to go first we had to go to a reception with all the guests at the residence of the ambassador or the consul at the Averted. And it was at 2:30 and we're supposed to be at the stadium at 4. And I was like, Doctor, I mean, it's his name is just, it's impossible. It's the final. France is playing. It's in Paris. And he goes, listen, I have no choice. We have to go. So long story short, when we get out, we had a motorcade of Renault Espace. And I was sitting in the first one next to the driver with the president of the company in my back. And he said, okay, Eric, what are we waiting for? I said, please give me 5 more minutes. And I waited and it worked. And basically, Henry Kissinger was leaving Paris at that moment, like an hour before. And we had his police escort coming to pick us. And we drove in Paris counter traffic the day of the final. And we just arrived on time at the stadium. It was just phenomenal. But those things, it happens once in your life, just crazy. Anyway, so you're doing that. And then what made you leave and you said, what, I have the corporate bugs or the entrepreneur bugs? What made you decide to leave?
Great question. I hadn't yet caught the entrepreneurial bug. It was my first job out of school and I had an amazing experience and I was learning so much and I was rising through the ranks. But I felt like there's a big world out there and what's going to happen is I'm going to blink and I will have been here 10 years. And then I was afraid I was going to be a one-trick pony and that was going to be my narrow box that I was in and I couldn't get out of it. And so I was a little concerned about being pigeonholed. And before, committing to spend the rest of my days in my career at this organization, which by the way, I had some friends who were there at the time and they're still there and they've had very rewarding careers and they're enjoying it. Yeah. I needed to see what else was out there and I wanted to test myself a bit. And it was time. I was very comfortable there. I had great mentorship. I had, a great feeling. It's a wonderful, very professional organization, but I knew I needed to see what else was out there before I could commit. I had a commitment issue, basically.
Excellent. So you're doing different venture, as you mentioned, work with different organization. And then you went with this startup in South Florida. And one day you're thinking, okay, now I need to start my company. What's going into your mind at that moment? And what are you picking the type of company you want to launch? Because obviously you study communication, you do PR, you have events experience. What's going into your mind? And also, are you single or you already have a family that you have to support with your wife?
Yeah. So when I moved to Florida, my wife was actually 9 months pregnant with our second child, and I had a 2-year-old. We knew nobody in the state when we moved here, maybe 3 or 4 people. So word to your listeners, if you have an opportunity to move, don't do it with a wife who's 9 months pregnant. That's not a good time. Don't do it in the middle of summer because it's very, very hot and unpleasant here. If you value staying married and keeping a happy spouse, don't be like me, is the bottom line. Around the time I made the decision to leave the startup, it was very clear to me that the startup was blowing up in a good way. But I also knew that it was only a matter of time before it, as many startups do, was going to blow up in a bad way. And I wanted to make sure that I got out and did my own thing. I had a really interesting education at the startup. I learned a lot about how venture funding works, the relationship and the interplay between investors and then the business owners, the politics that play out, what hypergrowth looks like, the problems that come with it. And ultimately, I would say I started Red Banyan out of desperation. I knew that this company that I was working in wasn't going to make it. And I just had 2 jobs since I left APAC where I ended up not feeling really good about the culture of the organization. And I didn't like the way they did business. And, I went to my wife and I said, we had a tough conversation. I said, listen, I've just had 2 instances in a row where I've thrown my lot in with an organization based on sort of the promises they told me, they made to me and the story they told me. and it didn't work out. This is 2 times in a row now.
Mhm.
I really feel like the next move is I need to just be responsible for myself. And so that way, if it works, I know that I'm responsible for it. And if it doesn't work, I have no one to blame but me. And so I said to my wife, just give me 1 year. Let me see if I can make this work, if we can get our bills paid. In retrospect, I don't know that I would have the guts to do what I did now, what I did back then. I think I was so desperate in just wanting to just give it a shot. The other thing was, you asked me why this kind of business. Well, honestly, because Eric, I didn't know how to do anything else. I'm a communicator, and that was all I'd done my entire career. I did it in politics and policy, then I did it in a private company, then I did it at a startup, but all I really knew was communication. So I wasn't prepared to start any other business. The challenge came that I was really good at doing the work, but I didn't understand how to be an entrepreneur. And that's where getting involved with EO and getting coaching and mentorship from other entrepreneurs made all the difference. So in time, I was able to get that education that I never had and transition from thinking of the business as a consultancy and booking all my time to building an enterprise and an organization that could operate with me at the helm, but didn't need me for the day to day. And it's been an evolution. It's been a process. But again, I look back and I can't believe that I was willing to make that leap. And I don't know that I would do it again. There's a lot of hard work, but in the end, I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And I learned a lot of really valuable lessons along the way. And I'm a believer that all your experiences in life, if you've got the right mindset and mentality, they're all leading you on a journey, and you have to just trust that it's right. And then I don't believe in looking at any experience as a negative. So even though I had some negative days and some things that were very, very hard and unpleasant at those 2 organizations, what a great way to learn. I learned what I didn't want to do. I learned how I didn't want to operate. I learned what kind of clients I didn't want. I learned things that I would never repeat those mistakes. So you learn a lot more from the mistakes than you do from the wins.
Absolutely. I loved your mindset. It's really great. And I couldn't help but smile when you say I didn't know anybody in South Florida, because today, and not only in South Florida, but there are the people that you know, and the rest are the people that know you. So today it's like, oh yes, of course, Red Banyan, of course, Evan. Now, going back to when you started your company, how did you find your first customer?
I found the first customer right at the time I was launching the business. And so at the time I was thinking to myself, I want to start a company and I want to focus on communications because that's all I know how to do. I'm going to obviously start a communications firm. And I went on monster.com, which was a way that you would find jobs at the time. And I found this organization that happened to be, they had their government affairs office located in Fort Lauderdale. So this is just a stroke of remarkable serendipity, good luck, good fortune, fate. I don't know, whatever you want to call it, predestiny. So I'm reading this job description and it says, we're looking for someone who is a strategic communications expert, who understands the political process, has a background in crisis communication, can navigate the legislative process, knows how to develop materials for multiple audiences, is strong on internal and external communications, and a great writer.
Did you write the ad for them, or?
So I read this ad and I'm like, they wrote this for me. So I did what everybody, I sent them an email immediately and I applied. And I got an interview and I went in and I met with the VP of government affairs who was hiring for the position. And at the time we had a great interview and she was like, this is crazy. You are exactly what we are looking for. I want to hire you. The job is yours. And I said to her, I would love to work with you, but I'm committed to starting my own company and I will work with you, but I need to do it as a consultant, not as a full-time employee. And she said, but I don't want you as a consultant. I want you as part of the team. And I said, well, I'm very flattered and I appreciate it, but I must say no. I can do this as a consultant. Otherwise, I simply can't do it. And so at the time, she said she wanted to think about it. And, when I quoted her a rate to get started, she countered by offering me 50% of what I was asking. And at the time, I had no clients. All I had was a website. And I took it because I needed to take it. And getting paid something was better than getting paid nothing. And honestly, that became my first client, and it was a big client. And for the first 4 or 5 months, it was my only client, and had a great relationship with that organization, did great work for them. But I also learned a very valuable lesson about, if you're an entrepreneur, you can't afford to have too much of your revenue tied up in one client, because then a couple of years later, I had them and another client, and their budget didn't get approved. And in a 2-sentence email, I lost over 60% of my income.
Yeah.
Sorry, our budget didn't get approved. Freeze work immediately.
That is something that I've observed with many people, unfortunately, in our industry, that are a one-person company. They have one customer, totally dedicated to the customer. They're not delegating a lot of things that they could actually be delegating, and free some time to look for other customer. And then when the project is over, they say, oh my God, I don't have any customer. I have to look for it. And then they find a customer, and then it's the same vicious circle that you need to break, to your point. So several years later now, you are, and how many offices you are in the US?
We're a team of 23 at this point. And we've got people in Los Angeles, New York, Washington, Atlanta, Florida, Denver, and Northern Florida.
Awesome. I like when I ask you the question, you had to think. You remind me, and if he's listening, a very good friend of mine, David Rich. He was working for George P. Johnson worldwide. And one day we're sitting next to each other in a plane going to an MPI board meeting. And I asked him, so how many offices you have? And he goes, I think 26. And I start laughing. I say, David, I can't tell you exactly how many people I have. You don't know how many offices you have. But that's the size of it. Now, with all your experience, you wrote a book last year, Crisis Averted. Not only did you write it, but you read it, and I listened to it on Audible. And I really love not only the way you are writing the content, but the way you are telling the book. It sounds to me almost like a Netflix series. So I really loved it. Now, for
wait,
people,
it sounded like a what?
A Netflix series.
Oh,
I mean, that not the sound, but the content. Like, I really want to know the way you're telling the story was really good. So, for people listening that have their own business, what are some of the absolutely must think about that you recommend from that book and from your experience, especially things that people are not necessarily thinking about being their own boss or having a small firm, and thinking maybe that PR and crisis is always for the big shot, where it's not.
Yeah, it's not for only the big dogs. It's for everybody. And it's never been more important than it is right now. We live in a very dangerous time, and it's never been riskier to be an organization of any type in any industry. And with the interconnectedness that comes from the internet, this rush to judgment, the combination of the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, cancel culture, all of these things culminate in a maelstrom. And a good person with a good company trying to do the right thing is never more than one bad article, comment, review, or accusation, false or fabricated, from facing an existential crisis. So I wrote the book, Crisis Averted, with the idea in mind that if I helped one business owner or one executive at an organization prevent some of the pain that I've seen some of my clients endure, it's worth writing it. And I think, in terms of your question of what should people do, first and foremost, awareness is the key. You first need to understand that it is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when you are going to face something. And the magnitude of what you're facing will vary. So not every crisis is going to be some of the more dramatic ones that I tell in the book, that are in your organization, someone almost kills somebody, or that you have a murder-suicide within your building and you don't want anybody to find out, because it's really hard to find tenants if you've got a big scandal like that going on within the building, or that your COO gets frog marched out of the building because he's an unregistered sex offender and over 60% of your staff quits on the spot. Not every crisis is going to be that magnitude. So a crisis can be something much smaller on its scale, but can also be damaging. It can be a Glassdoor review from a disgruntled former employee that accuses you of things that are not true. It can be negative reviews on Yelp or any of these other review sites, or a Google review. It can be a threat of litigation. It could be actual, someone sues you for something. The key is to be aware that this is the world we're living in. And as a consequence, you got to be prepared. So if you take away nothing else from this conversation, other than that, DC's crazy and you never know what the people are like. And the mean guys are nice, the nice guys are mean. You just never know. People are, different on TV. Is take this away. You got to be prepared, and you need to take the time to think about your business or your organization and actually put pen to paper on what could go wrong. And then there are some core questions to ask yourself in terms of how you're going to react. And the book is filled with real life, not just examples of things that went wrong, but also organizations that did a good job. And there's a toolkit in the book that tells people what they need to do in order to be prepared. And so, the best thing you could do, not to sound like a guy just, shilling for his own book, but if you pick up the book and you read it, there are some concrete examples. It's written in mind for entrepreneurs that you can take some of the ideas in the book and take some of the specifics and apply them to your own business. And it's well worth the time, because crisis communications is an example of a place where that old saw is true. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Awesome. Now, what you say about Yelp trigger a story. I'm sure you know about it. I just want to, for those listening, explain that story. And it's with Yelp, it's with politics, and it's with business. Forget about his first name. It's a restaurant owner in Detroit. His name is Sassoon, and he had posted during the last attack of Hamas on Israel, and Israel defending itself. He had posted Am Yisrael Chai, Israel will live on social media. Now, he owns a restaurant. The next day, he had 5,000 negative 1-star Yelp review. People complaining that have seen rats in the kitchen. And the funniest, if I can use that word, thing of all, is that the restaurant was under renovation and was closed for 4 months or 6 months when that happened. So I know it's extreme, but how can you, in this world today, where it's so polarized, where it's almost like, good morning, America, what are we offended by this morning? And people cannot talk anymore. They're all immediately using names and doing this type of thing on Yelp if you have a service or restaurant business. How can you prepare? And most importantly, how can you react when those things are happening?
It's a great question. And the answer is you have to take an approach that I explore in great detail in the book, which is called press the truth. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that you have to become an advocate for yourself like never before. You have to be willing, if there's misinformation, falsehoods, lies being told about you, you can't afford to leave that unchallenged. So whereas in the past, it may have been an option to sit back, let yourself get bloodied a little bit in the news cycle and let it pass. Well, now with the internet, things live forever, and you can have an internet mob coming for you that fast. So it is incumbent upon you to press the truth, to be proactive, to be engaged, to be willing to spend the time, even if it's painful, see what people are saying about you online, but don't just sit back and let lies go unchallenged. because when it comes especially to negative reviews, a lot of times people say, oh, I'm not going to respond. I'm not going to dignify that. That's nonsense. I'm not going to dignify it with a response. The key is, unfortunately, people tend to believe what they read and they hear, even though, guess what? Some information on the internet, don't tell anyone, it's not true. There are things that are not accurate on the internet, believe it or not.
I remember what Abraham Lincoln said: don't believe everything you see on Facebook.
Did he say that? Wow, that's amazing. He was such a prescient individual. So it wouldn't surprise me, honest Abe.
So you have a small business, you're planning events, it can be linked to politics, but it can also be linked to controversy, or you're in an industry that is targeted like people. As a business owner of an event business, and maybe we can conclude with that today, but
sure.
What is your recommendation in terms of planning, and what should you be thinking about or speaking about with your customer in terms of crisis and preparing for crisis when you're planning an event?
So for event planners specifically, if I were an event planner and I were working on an event, and let's try to use an example, even though it's made up, it'll provide a concrete example so that we're not talking about things in this amorphous philosophical way, but we're talking brass tacks. So imagine I was going to host an event, or I was helping to plan an event, and I'm sitting thinking about what could go wrong at this event. So, and again, I'm not an expert in your industry, but I'm an expert in crisis communication. So I'll be able to tell you what, from my perspective, and I'm sure your listeners can think of 5 other things, probably better examples of things that I'm not thinking about. But here's what I would say is, you're holding this event. What could go wrong at the event? And this is from a crisis management, in not just reputation, but, say you've got it sounds simple, but say you're doing an outdoor event. What are you going to do? You need to have a contingency plan for if the weather is bad, if there's a natural disaster, if there's, a global pandemic, say that all of a sudden people aren't able to get together. What's your fallback plan? That's 1. 2, if you're having it somewhere, is there anything that's controversial about the event or the organization? Do you anticipate that there could be protesters? Are there going to be discussions taking place at this event that are meant to be off the record and private that you don't want getting out? Maybe you're planning an event that's a corporate event, but it's really important. You're going to be talking about sensitive things and you don't want your competition or the general public to know. Okay, well, you have to have a contingency plan in place to make sure that you protect the confidentiality of the event. So how are you doing that? If you want to make sure that people are safe at the event, what's the evacuation plan? Mm-hmm. Are you in compliance with the fire marshal and up to code in terms of having the necessary exits or the prevention fire, extinguishers and things like that? Or do you have security for the event in the event that someone disrupts the occasion? What's your plan? What's the protocol? Are the security people allowed to put their hands on the protester and take them out? Are they not? Are they going to ask? How are you monitoring to make sure that only the right people gain access to your event? What are you going to do if 50 kids show up and they come in uninvited and then all of a sudden all your numbers are screwed up? So these are the types of things that just off the cuff, I can tell you if I were an event planner, I would be thinking about. And I'm sure, like I said, there could be 10 other ones, but think about your unique business. Think about the type of event. Think about who the client is, and you'll be able to really zero in. You can't anticipate everything, but imagine, what's your plan if you're hosting an event and someone gets injured at the event? Is there a defibrillator on site? What if an elderly person falls down and gets injured? You're going to have a plan. Don't wait until you're in the middle of the crisis, because when you're in the middle of it, that's the worst time to be planning your response.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for that, Evan. Last question for today, because I know you're an extremely busy person, and I'm really grateful for the time we're spending together today. It's a question I've always asked. My friend Jason Gaynard mentioned it. I always mention his name all the time. When we meet in 1 year with a bottle of champagne, what will we be celebrating?
We will be celebrating you and I together, living our best life, accomplishing our business goals, celebrating the health of our family, our kids, and the fact that we are very, very fortunate also to live in the United States. And you know full well what it's like to live in another country where you don't have the same freedoms, the same opportunities. So you and I, my friend, we will raise a glass to toast health and prosperity and the safety and security in this great country, and a commitment to living out to be the best life you can have, to be the best person you can have, and to try to lift up your friends and your community and to be a positive contributing member of our society. That's what we're going to be toasting.
Amen and l'chaim.
L'chaim.
So how do people get in touch with you?
Smoke signals.
Okay.
No.
Email, LinkedIn.
Yeah. We are a modern tech communications firm. You can find us at our website, redbanyan.com. You can connect with me directly on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. You can check out Red Banyan on Instagram. If you want me to read you a bedtime story, you can go on Audible and you can download my book. You can find more about me at evannierman.com. You can just Google me. Any of those ways are ways that you can get in touch with me, and I would be glad to hear from you and happy to continue the conversation after this podcast concludes.
That's what I call walking the talk. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
Evan, thank you again for taking the time to speak with me. Really enjoy our conversation. And as I mentioned during the podcast, your book, Crisis Averted, is definitely something I'm recommending to everyone listening. If you want to reach out to me, please go on LinkedIn or join my Facebook group at www.evenbusinessformula.com/group. And if you found any value in this episode, please share it with your network and let them know about the podcast, The Business of Meetings. Thank you. Bye-bye.